The modern-day Olympics are international sporting events that unite people from all around the globe and give opportunities to showcase talent that takes years of hard work. However, this hasn't always been the case.
During the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games, the event became more of an athletic showcase when the well-known dictator Adolf Hitler converted them to Nazi propaganda that advertised the growing of the nation.
Those involved were aware of the controversy and felt responsibility for their attendance. The mass acts of Nazi Germans became revealed following the Games, and the now very grown nation would oversee one of the most gruesome genocides.
First place of the relays didn't matter, and the distance at a single javelin thrown was unimportant. These weren't Berlin Summer Olympics or a celebratory victory for first-place athletes. This was Hitler's Olympics of 1936. Who were the Nazis and what did they want? The Nazi Party was an anti-Semitic group led by Adolf Hitler. The political party emerged in 1933. This group was the embodiment of racism at the time and controlled all areas of German life by persecution of Jewish people. Adolf Hitler's goal with leading the group was to lead the Germans, who he believed were the master race, to success among the lower people, targeting the Jews. This dictatorship practiced merciless acts of mistreatment to people who weren't of the Aryan race, which included all people who weren't of the Nazi society. People of the Aryan race were seen as elite to the Germans.
Aryan supremacy was smashed to smithereens by the great non-Aryan athletes. Black athletes won the 100, the 200, the 400, the 800, the long jump, the high jump. It certainly proved that this Aryan business of supremacy was ridiculous. These were non-Aryans winning the most important.
These abusive acts included gas chambers, mass shootings, and concentration camps that were essentially murder factories. These killing centers were mainly for Jews and were responsible for over 2,700,000 of murders. Considering the discrimination of Jewish people, they were prohibited from German sports teams. The perspective of certain races is evident in the future Olympic Games and is a violation of basic human rights.
Berlin, Germany was selected to host the Summer Olympics of 1936 5 years before the Games. In 1931, the selection was based off a session that the International Olympic Committee, also known as the IOC, held a year prior, where 14 cities showed interest in hosting. While the anti-Semitic actions were minimized while the Games were approaching, the persecution of Jews happening in Germany under Hitler's authority sparked boycotts for the Games. The International Olympic Committee was aware of not only the actions of Nazi Germans, but also the controversy that other countries were facing about participation. This caused the IOC to send a member, Avery Brundage, to Germany, allowing for Jewish athletes to attend the event. Brundage was also partially responsible for the failure of boycotts, as he thought that the politics and sports should be separated. In his eyes, the boycotts were a form of fundraising.
The Games. This controversial Olympic game was much more impactful than given credit for in history. These Olympics were like no other. They were propaganda for the Nazis that claimed that their nation was tolerable and peaceful. The false truth was advertised throughout the entire game, with concentration camps still running that the Germans covered up and claimed that they were for food storage. However, Hitler's acts in the arena were not a reflection of his usual acts that stripped human rights. This is because he had to convince the world to join his nation. Even though his racist ideas weren't bold on the field, his controlling and demanding nature was still present during these times. During the opening ceremony, the crowd erupts in cheers while a mandatory salute of Hitler is done, and a flag with a swastika is walked across the arena. Swastikas were everywhere, which looking back was very intimidating. Margaret Lambert was a Jewish athlete that attended the Games. She claims that the outcome of her event didn't matter because she would always be so low in the eyes of the German.
I do. But it was such a peculiar situation. A year ago, I was called undesirable, inferior, by the Nazis, and all of a sudden I was supposed to be on the German Olympic team.
49 nations attended the Games. Also, 49 nations were exposed to the toxic party, and 49 nations that experienced the masking of the most racist and violating actions to be done to millions of victims. What did people do about this? How did this event become so populated with a master manipulator leading it? Many efforts to prevent support of the propaganda were made. Debate about participation of the Games was most popular in the United States. This was due to the responsibility that many athletes felt during the decision to participate. Some believed that defeat in the Olympic arena was the most effective way to counter the Nazis' views. Others felt responsible to boycott because they believed that athletes performing would be an act of endorsement towards the Nazis' nation. Public advertisement and polls about participation in boycotts were posted. However, these effects ultimately failed, causing more debate and allowing the games. So what? The expansion of Hitler and the Nazi Germany nation was immensely affected by this event. With nearly 4 million attendees, the society was well known and respected both by choice and not. 5 years later, Hitler and the Nazis were responsible for the Holocaust, a brutal genocide that murdered 6 million Jews, 2/3 of the European Jewish population. The Holocaust had inhumane amounts of rights violated and completely turned many countries upside down with the abuse. Although members of the 1936 Olympics were unaware that the situation of Germany and Jewish opposition would evolve to something so extreme, their efforts to stand up for their morals showed courage, responsibility, and accountability through their boycotts. This was happening at the same time as World War II, which was affected by the growing Nazi invasion of Poland. This wasn't a sudden event. In fact, it took years to build up and was strategically converted to propaganda and not only boosted the campaign, but further increased the Nazi regime to the horrid event it is now seen as today.
January 30th of 1933, Hitler was appointed to be the Chancellor of Germany.
February 28, 1993, suspension of freedom of speech, assembly, press, and other basic rights.
On March 20th of 1933, the first permanent Nazi concentration camp opened in Dachau.
April 1st, 1933. Nazi organized boycott of Jewish-owned businesses.
April 7th of 1993, Jews were excluded from government employment, including teaching jobs at all levels.
July 14, 1933, new law provides basis for forced sterilization of handicapped people, gypsies, and blacks.
In October of 1934, the first major wave of arrests based off of sexuality and race began throughout Germany.
March 16, 1935, military conscription was introduced.
In April of 1935, many of Jehovah's Witnesses were arrested throughout Germany.
September 15, 1935, there was anti-Jewish racial and citizenship laws issued at Nuremberg.
On February 6 of 1936, the Winter Olympics opened at a city along the southern border of Germany and Austria.
March 7, 1936, German troops marched unopposed into the Rhineland.
July 16, 1936, about 800 gypsies interned near Berlin.
August 1st, 1936, the Summer Olympics begin in Berlin.
While the games themselves weren't purely abducting rights, the Olympic Games of 1936 were ethically invalid. They were run far off from how they were intended. Hitler's true acts of racism and murder for the anti-Semitism he was practicing were hidden, which was exactly why inaccurate information was presented and endorsed at the Games.
In the end, the games were successful to the Nazis. The nation's growth then allowed for horrid events like the Holocaust to take place, and for more tragic murders that showed no mercy for people who weren't Aryan. This took place all the way up until 1945.
Although the boycotts were unsuccessful, many people from multiple nations made their voices heard even years before the games begun. This fulfilled what they thought was their responsibility to do and what they thought was morally correct. Athletes like Jesse Owens came victorious at the games. Jesse Owens, being African American and very successful at his events, stumped and challenged Hitler because of his racial views.
And wherever Hitler is today is no particular concern of his.
The 1936 Olympic Games that took place in Berlin August 1st was a grand vessel for the Nazis to grow the nation and in later time conquer over many countries and create what we know now as the Holocaust. However, there is not fault in all teams with competing athletes, considering that the whole promotion was a false face of the Nazi nation for the expansion to happen.
Even Jesse Owens stated, "When Hitler refused to congratulate me, it wasn't so bad. After all, I hadn't come there to meet him." This is the unsettling truth of how the Olympic rings were seized from Berlin athletes who came to spectate, stripping away many dreams and leaving them with a sense of loss and injustice. The Nazi propaganda tactics capitalized on this event, using it to further their agenda, and this ultimately leading to their success in manipulating the public and gaining further power. This is the truth of how the Berlin Olympic Games became Hitler's Olympics, the 1936 Games.